You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You will also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started. Hello, I'm Dr. Tony Martin Jr.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tony Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctor Is In podcast. And actually, this is our 100th episode.
Woohoo!
It's amazing.
Yeah.
We've been doing this now for a few years, and, we took the summer off. And a lot of people have been asking us when we're going to get back to doing our podcast. So we're actually very happy to be back.
Yep, very excited.
100 episodes. We've talked about a lot of things, a lot of different topics. And, we've got a lot of suggestions in terms of topics over the years. And what we thought we would do today is, really something that, we have, I guess, in our heads. And it's something that we developed really after, analyzing, one of the benefits of having a real clinic and seeing real patients. And you get a chance to really analyze trends and analyze things over the years. And we've done that with a number of things. And we found a fair amount of things over the years by doing that. And one of the things that happened as, you analyze tens of thousands of patient visits is we've found that there was something that, you and I, when we talk to each other, we call the Deadly Triad of all disease. So these are things that are found in every disease. And so what we're going to do today on this episode is we're going to reverse engineer disease. So we're going to start with disease, and we're going to work our way all the way back to how it starts.
Yeah.
And, really this came about a while ago when, we were looking up the top killers of Canadians and Americans, right? We were looking up the top killers.
Well, there's no difference between Canada and U.S. as far as what kills you, right?
Yeah, so the top killers in are obviously cancer, heart disease, strokes, Alzheimer's, and then even diabetes is on that list, right?
Which never used to be, right? Like if you go back into the, when I started practice in the 70s, diabetes was nowhere to be found on that list. So that's a major clue, right? When you think that that's come up into the upper echelon of disease. And I always tell people, look, you're going to die. That's a fact.
And chances are you're going to die from one of these things.
Yeah. Either you get hit by a bus, and that's accidental.
That's
you
right.
Can't control
and that's on the
that.
list, right?
That's
accidental
on the list.
death.
Yeah, accidental deaths are there. But generally, you're going to die of one of the big ones, right?
Yes.
Like cancer,
heart
cardiovascular disease.
Stroke.
Yeah. Big killers today, and they haven't gotten any better. No dents. In those big killers have gotten they've all
even
gotten
Alzheimer's
worse.
has made its appearance on the list. And I was reading an interesting article where they may be severely underestimating the deaths by Alzheimer's, because a lot of people are dying with Alzheimer's, but they're not attributing the cause of death to Alzheimer's. So a lot of people, I think if they factored the numbers in properly, and we've said this even about diabetes, if they've included people who are actually diabetics, because they still diagnose you based on blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
Even though we've said this so many times, that blood sugar is really a symptom. High blood sugar is a symptom of diabetes, not the cause. So you can, and like a lot of diseases, they have a lot of different symptoms. So it would be like diagnosing a disease based off one symptom, right?
Yeah.
And we've said this before, but high blood sugar levels are a lagging indicator. They can show up years after the fact that something's wrong. So somebody could be a diabetic really metabolically. And in all intents and purposes, the body thinks it got diabetes long before their sugar levels get to the point.
Yeah, and you made a real good point. I remember this really stuck with me after you and I were talking about this, that when you think of that organ, the pancreas, and its job, right? It's a food hormone, and its big job is to make sure, like, because we emphasize this in our courses, right? Both the serial killer course and the metabolic storm course.
Now, if you're listening and you're not familiar with those courses, The Serial Killer Revisited program is based off of our best-selling book, Serial Killers, and it's really a eating program, how to fix insulin resistance. And one of the effects of that, obviously, is losing weight. Yeah. And then the Metabolic Storm one you're referring to is basically the exact program that we use in our clinic to fix hormones.
Yeah, amazing. Mm-hmm. But you said, and I think it was sort of off air when we were getting ready to do the course, that when you talked about that, and I never really looked at it, but I've really, really been focusing in on this ever since you said it, is that when the body has an organ, the Bible says that your body is fearfully and wonderfully made, and it is because of when you think of the pancreas, its job, insulin that it secretes, is to take sugar out of your bloodstream. Right? Like it
because sugar is highly toxic.
Yeah, sugar is so toxic. And you were saying, and I'd never forgotten this because it's an image that I have in my head. Your body will do everything it can not to become diabetic. Everything
Diabetes
it can.
Diabetes is basically your body saying it can't do anymore.
Yeah, it's given up. Really,
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So it will make fat anywhere it can.
It'll put it everywhere.
Yeah.
Liver.
So when you see an obese person that's not diabetic, they really are.
Well, in fact,
they really are.
Obesity is the body's protection against diabetes.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't have obesity, everybody would be diabetic. It's just that the body will take that extra energy and store it in fat. It'll put it there, and it's trying to do that to protect the body from diabetes.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why, like that image in my mind, not that I wasn't well aware of what insulin is and what insulin does, but when you think of, you look at our society today and people are so much bigger, and it's a protective thing.
Yeah, the body, the body is literally doing everything it can to protect itself from diabetes, which is why for some people they become obese and they're not diabetic yet. Mm-hmm. Other people,
they are diabetic.
They
right?
are, yeah.
They are
metabolically.
They
may not be
are,
diagnosed as diabetes.
Yeah, because their blood sugar, like you say, right? Their blood sugar still doesn't hit that arbitrary number.
That's right. So but this is something that we'll talk about in an upcoming episode as well. But there's still some real consequences to having a little bit higher blood sugar, but not quite high enough to be diabetes. But we'll talk about that coming up because it was an interesting study that came out over the summer. Mm. So, basically, you look at diabetes is on the list, and we talk a lot about Alzheimer's, which is really a diabetes of the brain for a lot of people.
Type 3.
It's not like that for everybody, but for a lot of people, that's just in our opinion, a lot of people with Alzheimer's is really their brain is diabetic. It's just their brain has protected the rest of their body from diabetes. There are other causes of Alzheimer's, and we're not saying that's every cause. Sometimes it's free radical damage. Sometimes there's a lot of causes. Yeah. But for a lot of people, it really is their brain is diabetic, right? So you got a few things on the list. So here you have these, we're going to talk today about the big killers outside of being hit by a car, cancer, heart, stroke, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. If you're listening to this, that's pretty much how most of us are going to go. One of those ways, right? Yeah. So let's reverse engineer those things and go right back to the beginning, because one of the things that we talk about a lot is what makes us different is that we fully understand that you don't go to bed healthy tonight and wake up diseased tomorrow. There's an actual process that occurs between health and disease. So we're going to talk about that process
and
today.
You know what? And you said this before, and we've said it. People don't. What we're talking about now, okay, in terms of these big leading causes of disease, people used to die. Let's just go back when I was a kid. People didn't die of these things. They died of fever.
Yeah, it was
like
infection.
You said, it was infection.
Yeah,
right?
The infection was if you go back before the 50s, really, and we looked at this, I remember we did a talk on this before. Yeah. We did a presentation on this about how, pre-50s, the leading cause of death were all related to bacteria or virus. Yeah. They were the leading causes of death, right? So it used to be that if you were sick, you had a fever. And fever was an indication that something was going on in your body. But the top killers now, they're not giving fevers.
Yeah.
There's no more. I mean, they're not, lower lung infection is still on the list of top killers. But that's really the end result of a weakened body. That's what gets them. But they're in the hospital because of osteoporosis, or they're in the hospital because of
sarcopenia.
Yeah, hip fractured, and then they develop a lung infection. That's what usually takes it. That's usually what ends their life. But that's not necessarily, they didn't come in with that. That they picked that up along the way. So it used to be that the body would give you an indication that you were sick, which was fever, right? If you had a fever, you weren't well. And the funny thing is that a fever was an indication that your body recognized that something was wrong with it, and it was basically, somebody explained this to me a while ago. I remember even back when I was in school, and I found this interesting, is that fever, you have to look at a fever as if a fever is your immune system charging. It's loading up, it's ready to go. So the fact that you had a fever was a good thing, because your body was able to recognize that something was wrong, and it was getting ready, and it was doing everything.
Supercharging the immune system.
It was getting ready to fight it off.
Yeah.
The problem today, the top killers are not bacterial related or viral related. So you don't get fevers anymore when you're not well, right? If you have a heart issue, you're not going to get a fever unless it's a bacterial infection. So, there's not the same clue that there used to be that something was wrong.
But there's still clues.
And that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. There's still clues, but they're not the clues, and they're not the clues that usually traditional medicine looks for. They're not looking.
No, so the new fever today, and we've talked about this before, but it's still worth repeating. The new fever today is inflammation, right? When something's going on inside your body creates inflammation.
Yeah.
Now, we've said this before many times, and, we would say that inflammation is the root of all disease. And we know what we meant by that, and we should clarify that, because we believe a cause and effect, right? Something causes something to effect. Well, what's the cause of inflammation? Inflammation just doesn't magically appear, right? It doesn't just come out of nowhere for no reason. Yeah. There's always a cause of inflammation. But in every disease, so the ones that we listed, cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, Alzheimer's, there's inflammation present. But what caused that inflammation? That's what we're going to talk about. So if you were to reverse engineer all those diseases that we just mentioned, one step before that would be
inflammation
and symptoms, in a sense, right? Like if you would have symptoms, for example, if you had fatigue, high blood pressure, if your heart's giving you some, if your heart's funny, or there's a whole bunch of different ways that it would show up. But the base there would be inflammation. So you have inflammation. But let's talk about what we call the Deadly Triad that
causes inflammation.
So we're going to go one step further. Rather than just saying inflammation is the cause of all disease, we're going to talk about the three things that we see causes inflammation in all those diseases. And so that's what we'll share with them. That was
now we're giving away our trade secrets. I hope you know that, eh?
These
Son?
are this is our thinking. This is how we process information. This is how we address health. Right? This is the foundation.
This is what we could rewrite our book. Secrets your doctor won't share with you. Right? Now we're going to share with you secrets that your doctor.
Well, and to be honest with you,
the doctor doesn't know about.
No, because we talk about we talk with a lot of doctors, and we actually help a lot of doctors with their nutritional understanding. This is just something that we put it together because we've analyzed everything.
Yeah.
And we've looked.
Well,
at
it's our clinical, because again, just a little side. There's study after study after study, and we love studies. I mean, we really do, because they give you clues, and there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work. But I just don't know of anything better than clinical experience, right?
This summer, and this would be an interesting podcast to do as well. Research has taken a lot of hits over the summer. Yeah. A lot of fluffed up stats don't add up. A lot of sponsored studies conflict of interest.
I always like when you say what the NASCAR, they should be like NASCAR drivers, you know?
Yeah, especially if you're at a
doctor's
conference, a medical conference,
Yeah.
and they're giving a speech, they definitely should be having a NASCAR jacket,
With
right?
all the sponsors on. This is sponsored by Eli. Eli.
This speech is brought
Bayer
to you by
and
Merck.
Merck.
The coffee in the back is sponsored by Lilly, and the cookies that you're eating is sponsored by these guys, and that's because that's basically what's happening. But it really has affected research. So that's why clinically, as you mentioned, that's what matters to us. Research is nice and it backs up a lot of times, but it's what we see clinically that really matters to us. So let's talk about that deadly triad of all disease. So these things will trigger inflammation, right? So there's really three things that we can identify in pretty much every one of those major killers.
Yeah. Never seen there's so few exceptions to it that it's not worth even talking about.
I can't even think about it like in terms of the top killers, right? I can't even think about that. So, all right, so let's just talk about those three. We call it the deadly triad, right? So the top of the triangle is insulin, and we'll talk about that more in a second. And then you have free radical damage, and then the third thing is leaky gut syndrome.
Yeah,
right. Those are the first things that happen as you
go down
That's right.
the top.
The second you are no longer healthy and you start to head down that long path to disease, those things start to happen inside you, right? And the thing is, this is important to understand. This is that any one of those things can trigger it. They don't all happen at the same time. One can start, but it triggers the other two usually, right? So let's talk a little bit about those three things. Okay. I mean, we don't want to spend too much time on this, but let's talk about that deadly triad and the effect that it and how it leads to inflammation. So let's go through that. I think that people listening would like that information. So let's talk about insulin first.
Well, insulin's a food hormone, right? So every time, just to give you the basics. Understanding of what insulin is. It's a hormone, right? That it's a food hormone.
And what's interesting is because it's a food hormone and it really should only be secreted when you're eating food. Mm-hmm. When you're not eating food, one of the problems with insulin resistance is they have elevated fasting insulin, right? They got insulin in their system for a long time.
And we test that in the office, by the way.
So let's just talk quickly about how insulin becomes a problem. Let's just really quickly go through that. If you've been listening to us for a while, we've talked a lot about this, but I tell you, we will talk about this on every episode because it's the key.
It's what we do.
It's so vital to understand this. So, as we've mentioned, glucose is toxic, right? Blood sugar is toxic. You need so little of it to succeed, to function. It's so tightly regulated. Well, in fact, you have three hormones to raise blood sugar, and you have one hormone that essentially lowers blood sugar. So we're supposed to be low all the time in a sense, not too low, not like hypoglycemia, but we're supposed to have a very controlled blood sugar level. So what happens
tightly controlled.
It's extremely tightly. It's dangerous if it's too high or too low. So it's very well regulated. So, and then of course we're eating foods, right? We're eating highly processed foods. We're eating highly, sugarized, high carbs, bad fatty acids.
160 pounds of sugar a year. The average Canadian, North American, 160 pounds of sugar, 160 pounds of flour, which will be sugar in 5 seconds.
So, as a result of this,
engineered food, right?
Like our sugar levels are always fluctuating, up and down, up and down. So they tend to go too high. I mean, that's a much bigger problem than too low. Yeah. So they tend to go too high. Then our body secretes insulin. Insulin then will take that glucose out of our system and get basically, insulin basically is what I call a nutrient partitioner. It partitions nutrients. It basically tells glucose to go to different places. It will either, send it to your muscles to be stored, your liver to be stored, and if those are full, it'll shove them in your fat cells. And if your fat cells are full, well, you can always make more fat cells, right?
There's an endless supply of fat cells that your body is able to produce, right?
So this will go on for quite a while. However, after a while, as you continue to make insulin over a long period of time, your cells stop listening to it. They get tired of it. They just stop listening. So what happens then? You need more insulin to do the same job. So whatever you used to be able to do with a little bit of insulin, now you need a lot more insulin to do the very same thing. And this results in higher insulin levels. And that's how it starts. From there, you become what they call insulin resistant. And then high levels of insulin is bad news. That's where you start to get metabolically damaged. That's when things start to fall apart. So insulin, as this is happening, will create inflammation. And then inflammation, left unchecked, will eventually lead to some kind of disease.
Yeah, because inflammation is a very destructive, meant to be very part-time. It was meant to fever. It was meant to be a temporary rev up the immune system.
Something's wrong, fix it.
Something's wrong, fix it. And now it hangs around forever. And it starts to be very destructive to the body.
And it's interesting because, studies, especially new ones, are starting to show this more and more, that many types of obesity are linked to cancers. A lot of different types of cancers are linked to obesity. We're of the belief that cancer is a metabolic disease. It's an environmental disease more than a strictly genetic aspect. Mm-hmm. But insulin, when your insulin gets out of whack and you've become insulin resistant and you start to create inflammation, you can get any of those top 5 killers that we just mentioned: cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. And it'll show up differently. Some with high insulin may end up with a heart attack. Other people may end up with Alzheimer's. It just depends on how our body adapts to that insulin resistance and what organ will it sacrifice. Some are going to just be obese and become diabetic. Others, their heart may give out on them, right? So that's what happens with insulin. So let's look at the other one, which is, let's talk about free radical damage, because this is something that's been around for a while. People have known about free radical damage for a while.
Oxidative damage.
Yeah, it's just, whenever somebody asks us what we mean by free radical damage, we always just kind of give the analogy of an apple cut up on the counter, right? You cut an apple.
It's accelerated. It doesn't take long till you watch it, right?
Yeah, it's rusting.
Body rusts out.
It's interesting. The very same thing that gives us life, oxygen, also slowly takes it away from us because it's rusting us out, right? Yeah. We're rusting. So one of the problems is that we live in a very toxic world. We just did a newsletter that went out just this week where, it was a study done on drinking water. And they measured drinking water from all over the world. And they found that, pretty much 80% plus of the drinking water in the world is loaded with plastic. So if you're listening, there's a good chance you're drinking plastic every day, right? It's just, that's how it is. And then another study was done not that long ago. They looked at the plastic content. It was a German study, and they looked at 24 German beers, and every one of them had plastic in it. And then another study.
But you can't get away from it.
No, it's everywhere. We live in a plastic world. Yeah. Another study looked at local sugars and local honeys loaded with plastic. And then another study from France looked at the air quality and found that we're breathing in plastic. We live in a plastic world. Plastic contain it's just, that's the reality of it, right? So,
you live in a toxic soup, right?
And that leads to rusting. That leads to free radical damage. Yeah. That destroys organs. I mean, it's estimated that we are bombarded by over 1 million free radicals a day. So our body is constantly having to fight free radical damage. And it does that with antioxidants, obviously, right? It donates an electron. It makes it stable. But at the end of the day, when we start losing that war on free radical damage, when we can't keep up, either through poor diet, poor sleep, not getting enough antioxidants. We can't get enough antioxidants, then we start to break down. Our body starts to age faster. And that leads to damage, leads to inflammation, which then leads to cancers, heart, stroke, diabetes, and Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Because when you look at blood vessels, right, even in an Alzheimer patient, they've had chronic, usually free radical damage. High levels of insulin causes glycation end products, which is a big word.
But you know what? We should do a podcast on that as well, because we get people asking us about what that means and the effect. And
but it's all part of that little triad that you said, the triad of disease, right? The insulin, the free radical damage. You know, we talked about free radical. I think the very first book I ever wrote.
Your first book was written essentially on the effects of free radical damage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk quickly now about the last part of that triad, which is leaky gut syndrome. Now, we talk a lot about leaky gut. And the funny thing is, every time we put an article up somewhere or we're talking about free radical damage, somebody always comments that it's a made-up disease. Oh, it's fake, right? Fake news.
Fake news, yeah.
Well, somebody forgot to tell the researchers that this is fake news, because there's a lot of research done on what they call increased gut permeability, which is just the scientific way of saying leaky gut syndrome.
Yeah.
Right? We call it leaky gut because that's what it is, but medically, if you did a PubMed search on gut permeability, there's a lot of studies on it because it affects everything from your joints to your brain to your skin to your liver to your kidneys to your heart. I mean, they're all connected to what they call increased gut permeability.
Yeah.
So
your microbiome.
Yeah, so let's talk really quickly about what even happened. Let's talk about leaky gut real quickly.
Okay. Well, how do you get it?
Well, that's an interesting thing, right? So
how, when, why, where, right?
Let's
how do you
talk
get
about first what it is, and we'll talk about how you get it,
okay.
Right? So leaky gut, we've said this before, but it probably is the best named disease condition out there. It's a great name because...
Yeah. Well, the Latin didn't get to it, right?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Yeah. We always laugh about this, right? I mean, when they were... when medicine was coming around and, they started to name everything in Latin, they did that for a reason because they wanted to sound smarter.
Yeah, and they didn't want the masses to know what they were talking about.
And I like anatomy. I mean, I love clinical anatomy. And, some of the names of the muscles literally mean the muscle next to that one, but it sounds so good in Latin, right?
Latissimus dorsi.
It's so awesome. I mean, it just sounds so, semi-membranosus and all these great names, right? But anyways, like you said, they didn't name leaky gut in Latin because it would have been something else. Yeah. But in English, it literally is leaky gut. And
it really is leaky gut.
Yeah, the gut is leaking into the bloodstream.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a barrier, right? There's a barrier in the intestinal wall that is supposed to only allow certain things to cross from the gut into the blood. Good things, vitamins, nutrients, all these water, all these essential things that you need, and there's a filtration system there. Yeah. However, boy, that's one of the first things that goes whenever somebody's not well. The gut.
Yeah. And isn't it a beautiful thing that we test for that?
It's so easy to test for.
It is. But you know what? The thing is, I can show it. They said a lot of patients would love to look at that, right, and to see it. But you're right. I mean, it's incredible. And believe me, when I remember, I don't know what doctor said it might have been years and years and years ago, said that 80% of all diseases start in the gut. Well, it's more than that.
Well, and so let's talk about, as you mentioned, what causes it.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing that causes it, obviously, would be, the fancy word is dysbiosis, which is basically a fancy way of saying that the bad bacteria outnumbers the good bacteria or is winning the war.
And
right?
how does that happen?
Well, that happens a lot of different ways. One, pretty much everything we do in a daytime kills our good bacteria, right?
Well, look at the plastic. You just talked about drinking water, right?
Kills that.
What
about
antibiotics?
Well, chlorine in the water.
Yeah.
Chlorine kills it.
Yeah.
Antibiotics destroys it.
I'm a cause and effect guy. You know that when we do the history
all
in
the time.
Our clinic.
Yeah.
And wow.
We don't dismiss any symptoms because there's a cause and effect for everything.
No, I had a young guy in the office today, and he was very, very bad digestive issues, and really bad. And I mean, he had some major issues, And I asked him, I said, were you on lots of antibiotics? Like, this guy's maybe 22, 23. Were you on a lot of antibiotics as a kid? Like, he didn't understand why I even asked him the question until I explained it to him after. He said, yeah, lots of ear infections. I remember that banana tasting stuff there that I took. Like, I took lots of that. I always had ear infections or whatever. As a matter of fact, I had to have my tubes replaced in my ears. And I said, well, guess what caused your digestive issues and your leaky gut?
Yeah. And that's the thing, even in a story like that, they don't look at cause and effect. See, this is kind of what irritates me a little bit. The doctors would say the cause are the bacteria, but our body can fight that stuff off. So why can what's the cause of that bacteria being allowed to win that war, right? But they stop and say it's bacteria, let's just kill it all. But why, right? They don't ask that why question, and that kind of irritates us. But all right, so we're already 30 minutes into this episode, and
our 100th that had to be
a little
long
longer,
one,
give a little bit more information. But essentially, what we wanted you to take away from this are, let's summarize this way: 1, you don't go to bed healthy and wake up diseased. There's a process that takes place. There are steps along the way, and this deadly triad that we talked about today is the beginning. That's what happens at the very beginning. So if you can correct those problems, right? If you can correct the insulin problem, if you can correct that leaky gut syndrome issue, if you can correct that free radical damage issue, you're going to stop that process from starting in the first place. And that's what we do. We address those issues, and we've built some courses around these issues. And everything we do revolves around that starting point. And the second thing I think you have to understand is that as you move from health to disease, the body gives you clues along the way, right? We call those check engine lights. Your body, the check engine light comes on, right? Low energy is a check engine light. When your energy is low, your body's telling you something's wrong. And I guess a third thing would be this. It's a very good thing that your body does give you warning signs. Imagine if it didn't. Imagine if you got no signs whatsoever until you dropped dead of a heart attack. What we're saying is this. It takes a long time to develop that, and your body will give you clues along the way. And when you know what clues to look for and how to fix them, it's amazing what happens to your health. So we want to thank you for listening to this episode. I know we covered a lot of stuff, and we kind of skimmed over some stuff. But if you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, if you can do us a solid favor and just leave us a review, or just a quick review on iTunes, that will help us out tremendously. It allows, Apple will then take that and it will show us to more people, and it'll introduce our podcast to more people. As we said, this is our 100th episode, and we've had a lot of downloads over the years. We've had a lot of listeners, so we're very humbled that people just take time out of their day to listen to us. And we hope to be doing this for a long time still. So thanks for listening.